for being concise and respectful with your time. We did get through everybody with a little tiny bit of time to spare. That does conclude our speakers. Are there any questions from members of council? Councilman Herndon.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Mr. President, for getting through that so that we can get everybody through, because I appreciate them coming in here. And I'd like to call Parks and Rec up to a few questions. Thanks, Scott. And there are other people in the queue, so I'm just going to ask a few questions and I will bow out. I asked these at committee, so these should not be surprising. We keep hearing that the neighborhood is not going to be involved in this process. You said this and Gordon said this. You're going to create a design committee who will be a part of this?
Yes, so the design committee, which we will put together, will be, of course, have some park staff on it. We have committed at the meeting, Gordon did commit to having a Greater Park Hill community member on that committee. This is going to be a public process, so we would bring that group together to actually select a design firm to actually move forward the design. At this time, like I mentioned before, there is no design of the park. There's some concepts. You know, there was a mention of swing sets and slides. That is still all on the plate. We are not saying this is going to be one thing or another. That is still to be decided.
Thank you. And second question deals with this being a designated park. So this will be owned. This is Denver Parks, and my understanding was there was even going to be conversations about the community being involved in the naming of the park, and I want to make sure that that was correct as well.
Yes, so what we would do is if this passes, if council feels that this should pass and move forward, we would actually begin working on rezoning this parcel to OSA, which means that would become a public park. Once that's done, we would move forward with the design. We would work on constructing the park, and once the construction is done, as I've done with many other parks in this city, over 1,000 acres, we would move forward with the designation of this park, which protects that park from ever being developed as anything else and anything that is not a park purpose. The other thing that I did want to mention is this would be a public park, so that means all park rules and regulations do apply. Everybody is welcome to this park. This is the community's park, so that is something that we would definitely stress.
Thank you. And two more questions, Mr. President. There was a conversation about not taking heed to any other offers. I only know of another one, which came from the owner of the brew pub, who was just to the north of the XL parcel. And could you just speak to that offer and why that was not considered?
So there was an offer that came in. You know, we had started this discussion in early 2016 with H&M Capital. The brew pub was moving forward. It was being designed. It was doing everything. They knew about all these discussions. Early 2016, we actually did go to a Greater Park Hill community meeting, and we actually had a presentation about this whole development. So everybody was aware of the possibility of having a swap and building the park on the east side. In November, we did get a proposal from the beer pub that is on the corner, and what that proposal was, there was two pieces to it. The first part of it was they offered, I believe, $150,000 to actually buy the parcel from the city and to build a private park. And then they would actually allow the city to possibly use the park. Or they would actually, the other part was they could maybe help us build a park. And so that was the proposal. And at that point, we had already been discussing, and we had a commitment from H&M Capital on what funding they would provide to this space. And so the two proposals just were not even close.
Thank you. And my last question, Mr. President, timing. So should this go through, we will start the process of designing a community design park that will go on the east side. If this does not go through, then we are going with the XL substation. Do we have a funding source for the XL substation to develop into a park?
No, as most of City Council, everybody on City Council knows, we have a process in parks. We actually have a CIP list, a planning list. And so what happens is we put all projects on our capital improvement project list, and that is all the projects that are in all the districts and all the city. And so those are projects that we want to get to. And so if this did not move forward, this project would go on that capital improvement list, and it would actually have to just jockey for a position, and then we'd have to, we'd have to see the priority and what was being done in the city, and it would fall in with all the other projects in the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman Herndon. Councilman Lopez.
Well, this discussion of parks, my allergies are going haywire here. Mr. Gilmore, I just wanted to ask you a couple more questions. So you acquired the park in 2010. Was it an Excel substation?
2015.
I'm sorry.
It was the end of 2015.
2015, and it was an Excel substation.
Yes, it was exactly like the one in Westwood that we purchased there.
So Excel substation became city-owned. What is if we were to build that out, designed? So we've already paid for it. If we were to build that out, design, build. I mean, I'm asking you to speculate, but what would the budget be for a built-out park like that?
For a park that size, even though it's a smaller park,
We're talking about like family structure, swings,
yes,
slides. Things
So
for
the
families,
design
right?
process, a park about that size as a pocket park, between probably $750,000 to $1 million.
Right. Okay. Talk to me a little bit about the process. I know that, in the chambers, I heard that we were testimony that the process wasn't clear, wasn't transparent. So walk me through the process,
Yes.
and as what DPR does.
So I have to take some responsibility for that. Back when I first started this job, I traveled to LA with Gordon Robertson, and we were traveling through LA. They have a project where they're building pocket parks all over the city.
Yeah.
And so when we came back, my thought was we can just look for possible opportunities in neighborhoods that desperately needed them. And so when these Excel transfer stations came up, I saw it as a perfect opportunity to possibly build a couple parks in neighborhoods that desperately needed it. So when it was available, we actually purchased it. I was attending meetings at Greater Park Hill. I was going and letting them know that I was working on this project, that I was hopefully going to purchase this parcel, and that it was on the east side, and at that time we had no funding, and that if we could do anything with that parcel at that time, there might be the possibility of, maybe taking out part of the wall because there's a big stone wall around it, and possibly creating maybe a dog park. We didn't. My commitment to the community is that we're not just going to take a parcel on that block and just grass it, and then actually maybe make a space that just was not activated, that actually could end up being more of a detriment to the community than an asset. So we really wanted something that was going to activate the space and making sure that park was going to be a positive draw for the whole community. And then H&M Capital, as we were just holding on to the parcel because we did not have any funding, H&M Capital did approach us in 2016 and said, hey, we have purchased the east side of the block, and we'd like to possibly just discuss with you the possibility of us helping you guys build a park on the east side. There was never, and I heard someone mention this, that H&M Capital was going to build a private park. There was never once any mention of this being a private park for H&M Capital. When they came to us and said, we want to help, this was always to build a public park that was going to be available to everybody. So we did get other proposals way back from other developers that never moved forward about building a private park. And so that may be where that came from. So we did start the discussion with H&M Capital. We kind of were discussing this. I was very clear with the community that this process right here would be what would have to happen if this moved forward, that the swap would have to be approved by City Council, and this project would not move forward unless this City Council approved it. So really this is now on City Council to say, do we want to move forward with building this park on the east side of of the street of Fairfax with somebody else's money, or do we want to wait and build it later with city funds on the west side? I mean, that's what it boils down to right now.
Right, so let me, if I appreciate that, Mr. Gilmore. I know that there was somebody from the neighborhood association in that area that spoke. I forgot your name. If you can come up and, I wanted to ask a question of the neighborhood, yeah, we're representing the neighborhood association up there. And I'm sorry, I forgot your name, ma'am.
Blair Taylor.
Blair, I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor. On that block, I'm looking at it right now. So 29th to the north, 28th to the south. You got Fairfax, you got the east side and the west side. I'm looking at the zoning in that area, and in that whole neighborhood, it's all zoned just on that block. The whole neighborhood's is residential. On that particular block, it's all Main Street. Main Street too. So it's commercial all around, right?
Yes.
What's the difference between a park on the west side and the park on the east side when they both have mixed use kind of commercial on both sides? What's the difference in with how you feel based off of your conversations with the residents in that area? What's the main difference?
I think one of the large differences is the sort of intent of the users. So the west side of the block is owned by a minority landlord. It houses a lot of nonprofits. It houses Greater Park Hill Community Board. It has a new ice cream shop that's used by families. You know, it's very residential. It's one story. It's very welcoming. There's a lot of mix of people and diversity. And I think a lot of the concern comes from when you put a green space that is abutted on both sides by brand spanking new development that's owned by a single developer. The people who've been there the longest aren't necessarily going to be migrating over. A lot of the concern has come with what types of businesses are going to go there. We've heard high-end grocery stores. That's not really what the neighborhood needs. We need like corner stores. We need things that our residents can use. We've lost laundromats. We've lost just sort of like everyday places. And I think that people were really hoping that the park would be a place where families and old residents, new residents, the people who showed up at our community design meetings were such a huge range of residents, and it was like an open palette. And what we're seeing when you look at the supporters is sort of one faction. We're not seeing a big diversity. The people who are opposed to this have real concerns, and they come from a diverse background. I hope that's what you saw.
I appreciate the response, and if I can, thank you. Can I get Mr. Maxwell, right, Ben Maxwell? You're the owner of the properties?
Correct, yes.
Now, and your reason why would you want to do the land swap? I mean, why not enjoy the park from across the street?
Yeah, altruistically, it was, we looked at the whole block. We got a good portion of the block under contract. We looked at the park on the other side. We initially had commercial design, so we own the park directly, or the parcel directly adjacent to the Excel substation as well, on the west side of the street. So we initially looked at doing commercial there. And what we decided was we really wanted to support, and when we were doing that, we were looking at doing 100% residential on the east side of the street. And being in that neighborhood, I knew and I felt like retail, office, and residential was a better fit for that block than just doing a large-scale residential project on the east side. With that, right now is not really a great time to build retail property. That's just not it's not as profitable, it's not as economical. There's just lots of downsides to building retail over building residential. So we looked at it and said, okay, well, what is there something that we could do that would be a differentiator and also give back to the community? And so really that was our decision on the park, was not to get increased rents, because I don't think we're going to get $1 increased rents, but just to attract more tenants, attract more community, attract more of a well-rounded, balanced development for the block, rather than what makes the most financial sense, which is residential.
One more question, if I may, Mr. President. So you approached with 650,000 plus commitments with build afterwards as well, too?
No, well, initially, so it's kind of evolved over time. Initially, we went ahead and did a design on the park because we knew that the Parks Department didn't have the money to do a design, so we went ahead and said, all right, well, we'll just design something to get a concept out there. So we did that, and we also tore down all the properties that were on this land. We've also spent quite a bit of money on the land that we're trading dollar for dollar. And we initially were going to build it, and then once we were done, go through this process of transferring it at that point to the city and doing this land swap after the construction was built.
If you don't build the park, if the park isn't built on the site, if this land swap doesn't go through,
Correct.
and the site that you have envisioned for a park,
We're giving the money
Bob, what's
at
gonna
the time
happen?
of the swap. We are giving the money, the
no,
$650,000.
if the swap doesn't happen,
Yes.
what happens to that property, which would be 2868 Fairfax?
We would probably start over from scratch on our design for the whole block.
And there would be no green space or?
No, we have, so in MS zoning, there is a 0 requirement for any open space. It's not we're not required to have 10% open space. We're not doing this to meet any city requirements.
Would you still donate to Parks and Rec?
Unfortunately, all that money would go to redesign the new buildings that would have to go there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Lopez. Councilman Kashmann.
Mr. President. Is anyone from Community Planning and Development here? Well, that would have been helpful for a land swap discussion. The question I'm trying to answer is, on the parcels on the west side, is there anything that anyone wants to talk to in the zoning code that would limit development on the west side from possibly at some point becoming akin to development on the east side? Okay. Thank you for that. Mr. Maxwell, I have a few questions for you.
Yes, sir.
So there's relevance at some level. These parcels that we're going to swap, what would you estimate each parcel would sell for if you're going to sell a third of an 0.36 acres, I think it is?
These were the last parcels that we purchased. It was 2 independent parcels and then a portion of a third parcel. And I believe we paid about $1.5 million for the land.
For that?
For just the piece of the park that we're giving to the city and that the city is giving.
Okay, so about 1.3?
1.5.
1.5, thank you very much. When you talk about affordable rents, do you have any clue what that means?
Yes. We looked at affordable housing on this instead of paying the linkage fee. Unfortunately, because we have 22 micro apartments and 21 3-bedrooms, micro apartments don't qualify or didn't initially when we were going through this process a year and a half ago for consideration in exchange for a linkage fee. So we went through that process for about 2 months with the Office of Economic Development and basically got to the point where it wasn't feasible.
Okay. Well, but I mean, do you know, are you planning 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms?
So we have 1-bedroom units, or basically micro apartments that are about 400 square feet with a loft bedroom. Those are going to be in the $1,200, $1,300 a month range. So 1 bedroom is very affordable for this city, and crazily enough. And then we have 3-bedroom units. Average rents for 3 bedrooms around the city are pushing above $2 a square foot in many apartment buildings. we're going to be at $1.60, $1.65 a square foot.
Do the math for me. What's that going to mean?
2,400, 2,500 for a three-bedroom.
Thank you. So when you develop this park, how close would your buildings be? How close can you build the edge of your buildings be?
According to zoning, we can build right on the lot line. There's a section of our building about 25 feet that is right on the lot line. The rear 30 feet is parking, so there's no building adjacent to that. In the front, 70% or so of the building has patios that face to the park.
So your access to this park?
The access to the park is all through the street.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, the rest of my questions are for community planning and development, who's not here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Kashmann. Councilman Espinosa is up with a question, but I think he also had an answer to your first question that he thinks he could answer. Would you like an answer from Councilman Espinosa? All right, Councilman Espinosa, take away.
For everyone, here's the graphic. So the yellow is the single-family, the surrounding residential. The red area is the zoning, the current CMS2 zone district. It covers both sides of Fairfax, and so since both both sides of the street are the same depth, essentially they're both capable of the exact same sort of development approaches.
All right, Councilman Espinosa, you're also up for questions?
So I didn't do the math. So what is the square footage, the square foot cost on residential sale, sort of the commercial, the value of residential development, new development in this area per square foot?
If we were to sell the townhomes?
Yeah.
It would be a guess because we haven't looked at it on a for sale basis, but probably in the 325 to 350 range.
Okay. Are there any, so for anybody else, are there any realtors in the audience that do work in this area? To sort of corroborate that? Okay, thank you. And then Scott, I've got a quick question for you. Is there anything sort of legally preventing the developer from giving $650,000 for the design and construction of the park on the former XL site?
No, I do not believe so.
Okay. So it's...
No.
Okay, thank you.
My attorney said no.
All right, thank you. No further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Espinosa. Councilman Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. President. Scott, at the podium already, would you be willing to put into writing what that advisory board would look like when designing?
The design committee?
Yep.
Yes, we could put something together.
By next week?
Yes, we could.
Okay, thank you. I have a question. I'm trying to figure out how to. Scott, can you again? I'm gonna take us back to the meeting that we had on committee, and I think there is a conversation in here around gentrification and displacement, as if you don't interact with that, right? And so I feel like I'm hearing two different things, right? I'm hearing something from the community and something that you don't understand. I know specifically that you've helped me with inclusion with Brick City at Curtis Park. But for whatever reason, we have missed the ball here, and that's what I'm really trying to understand. And so I want you to respond to that, and I also want you to help me talk through and help the community think through opportunities of inclusion, just like what we've done on the east side.
Yeah, so I have to take full responsibility as the deputy manager of parks. I mean, my goal was just to try to get a park built in this community, and if anybody made some missteps, I probably made some missteps, and I should have been probably a little more forthcoming on how this whole process was moving forward. We were just trying to move forward and I saw a great opportunity to get a park built in a community that desperately needed it with somebody else's money. So I kind of moved forward. When we got to the point, and when I got questions from Greater Park Hill or any community members, I was responding. In June of 2017, there was some questions about the naming, and I know Councilwoman Kniech was really involved in that, and there was some questions about naming it after a community member, and we realized that we would do that and we could work on that, and that could be a community process, and that was one of those sticking points, it seemed like. And so it continued to move forward, and I continued to try to engage, and then as the development started to coalesce, and H&M Capital had purchased the block, and then buildings started to come down, that is when this really, really became an issue, and I think people started seeing that this was happening, and I think the park became a target for the bigger issues of gentrification in the neighborhood and just some of the displacement and affordable housing and all those things. And I tried my best to explain to people that I'm building a park for everybody. As you said, I've worked on community issues in neighborhoods downtown and communities of color, making sure parks are built in communities of color, that we are building the best parks we can in all communities, because everybody in this city deserves a high quality park in their neighborhood. And that is what I'm shooting for with this. We made some missteps. We stopped our process and we slowed down. We started to engage. We went to some of their community meetings. They started a community meeting, and we went to those. We started our own process, and I believe through those two processes, those community meetings, the 7 meetings that were had, that we do have a good foundation to build a park that everybody could be happy with.
Okay, thank you for answering that. And I'll just say that the next step of inclusion when it's built is, I think, where it really has to be that way. And,
yes.
And I hope that.
And I agree.
I hope that Gordon, as we talk through that there, even next week, we can start thinking of some implementable items from the jump that the community can put into to be that.
And one thing I do want to mention, and I want to stress, Greater Park Hill did a really good job on these meetings, and this concept that they came up with are very valid, and we want to start our process with this community-led design. And so we're committing to that.
Okay, thank you. Is there an attorney with parks here? Attorney with real estate? Oh, great.
Good evening, Jason Moore, City Attorney's Office.
Jason, I see you everywhere, and I think this is the first time. I think it's the first time, like, this brother right here is an attorney. Okay, good. Jason, here's the crux, I think, of the issue. There's a ton of mistrust in the community, right? Ton of mistrust in my community of 5 Points and all over the city. And we as government, I think it's our responsibility to continue, when there's mistrust, to be even more transparent.
Right.
And so the issue for me is on this is that we don't have any, it seems to me, legal issues on RFPs when we're trading land and things like that. I've seen us do RFIs to try and get, request for inquiry, to just see if the land works, and we'll get a bunch of folks, and then we'll take it through a process. So there's no, you did a backroom deal. Tell me about our policy. And I know it's not, but is there anything that can help us to improve this policy so we don't have to go through this with the community?
Yeah, and it'll be a split answer. So I have my answer, what the general review of the advice I'd give the parks, but real estate has a policy as well. The XO 8 and XO 100, I think, deal with...
That's an executive order so that everybody's following.
I apologize. Executive Order 8 and Executive Order 100 deals with competitive process in contracts, and then, of course, the charter and the code deals with competitive process in construction. Depending on the deal, depending on the dynamics of the deal, depending on what Parks wants to get done, I might advise that they do a request for information or some kind of an RFP process to cover some of the political issues that might come up. So there are the rules, there's a code, but sometimes policy is gonna win the day if that is what you need to make folks happy.
And so on this situation, what did you advise?
I came late to this party, so this was pretty far down the road. So Parks had begun to negotiate the contours of the deal that they were going to do, land swap, et cetera. The issue of a competitive process for this did come up. I'll let Lisa Lumney finish out that answer. Based on some unique characteristics of the deal, I didn't see that a competitive process was required, but again, there was already a lot of momentum behind the deal.
So this is no legal issues with this?
Strictly speaking, I don't think so, no.
Okay, Lisa, would you like to?
Lisa Lumley, it is not often that we do an exchange, and the conversations had started by the time real estate was brought in. Because it was exactly parcel for parcel, square foot for square foot, literally across the street, that is why we thought that we could justify the unique situation of not going out to a true RFP or RFI, because everything was exactly the same, zoned the same, the values would have been the same.
So the executive order is, it's not a suggestion.
No, it's not. And what it does say, though, is we would still do our clearance and releases, which we do. We do our environmental due diligence, which we do. So from that standpoint, it's the disposition that would be called out on how we would do it and I will say there are certain other dispositions through our tax title that we may handle a little differently. So everything else in Executive Order 100, though, we would absolutely be following.
Last question. If you would have gotten a deal that was comparable, competitive, would have reviewed that deal, looked at that deal? Because there's many received the email today saying that there are 3 deals.
Yes, we would have, and I will say I'm only aware of one other offer as well. We did see that. That is why we actually slowed the process down at that point when I was made aware of the second offer. So we did look at it to compare those.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Brooks. Councilman New.
Scott, let me give you this right. Scott, that's the handout we received today, and on the back of it has design features that I assume that you're talking about as part of the design that came from the community. Is there any design feature that's listed there that is out of the ordinary, would not be considered as part of the design committee?
No.
Okay, so it all seems to be very in line with what you're saying with the design coming from the community.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, their design process at Greater Park Hill Community actually had some very valid suggestions, and we're going to, like I said, we're committed to taking that design effort and utilizing that to build this space. To be clear, this is 1/3 of an acre.
I know.
This is a very, very small parcel, so everything that the community has been suggesting, it will not all fit in this park. So the site limitations are our biggest thing.
All those will be considered, can be
Yes.
part of the process. Yes. Thank you. Ask the owner a question, please. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
There's been a lot of discussion about development of a good neighbor agreement with the neighborhood on the park and development there. Is that something you'd be amenable to?
Absolutely. We definitely want that with all of our tenants. And at the first meeting we presented to in the beginning of 2017, I mean, it was our hope that the Greater Park Hill would really help us create a neighborhood group and take over really planning events at the park, things of that nature, that permitting it through the City Parks Department.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman New. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Christine O'Connor. Hi. First of all, I wanted to thank Maria Flores, Flora, and Cara DeGette, and Nancy Francis, who had given me a tour about a month or so ago of the site. Christine. You had testified that that on the east side, it would be a private park. And I'm curious why you believe that would be a private park.
Well, I know it's going to be owned. I've heard, like everybody else, that it's going to be owned by DPR.
But you feel it would be treated as a private park?
Treated as. And I have the same fears that Sandy Robinette and others have expressed, that even though it is considered public, the intimidation factor of having restaurants and high-end retail, or maybe not high-end, as the developer says, we'll see. I'm not sure that it really is going to draw the same way, say, Turtle Park draws, or the park up on MLK, the block size.
Right. So what is really confusing me is why the neighbors feel that the park on the west side would also not be a private park when it would be surrounded by, eventually by, is it H&M? I'm sorry. H&M.
Yes, but it's not being, it wouldn't be developed. It would be developed with city money.
Right. But on the north side is the brew pub.
Yes.
Which one of the folks from the resident community testified is a gentrifying factor, and that would front right on the park. And in fact, the owner, we have the letter offer that he made. His first offer was to buy it and make it a private park that he would regulate. And so that would give me more concern than what I've heard here from Mr. Maxwell. And on the south side would also be an HM capital project. So it seems to me that they would be identical. So I'm wondering, I'm having a real confusion figuring out why
it matters.
Why you see, it seems to me that everything that was testified, the residents fear, increasing gentrification, not being inviting, exclusion, applies to either side. And so that if we killed this and kept on the west side, you would still have those same impacts. Tell me why you might disagree with that.
I see this as fundamentally different.
Okay.
I don't think the city explored options like going to Trust for Public Land and other funding to do it themselves. I think Scott just landed on this because it was easy, and DPR didn't do its homework.
Right.
I think that the fact that the developer is paying $650,000 to develop the park in and of itself indicates that he will have a say in the design. He will have a say in what happens there. He will be considering very carefully what kind of park goes in. It is not really a Denver public park that's been developed over the years and then got a slot, then found a land. I think it's fundamentally different.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. Councilwoman Kniech.
Thank you very much. Scott, can I follow up on the question you were asked about the community design? Because I feel like I got a slightly different answer. So when I had originally asked you, and I think it was Kelly, who I can't see who else back there if Kelly's here, but about the community design, you had shared that it didn't meet some of the specs. So because the question, why not just adopt the community design? And the answer was because it didn't meet Parks and Rec specs for, maintenance, you had a number of specs that you look to for how to design a park. So can you just help bridge for me that feedback I had gotten with the statement that everything here is on the table?
So you're talking about this design right here?
Yes.
So this design, like I said, has some great some great input, and it has some really valuable things. As we build parks, and I do want to mention something really quick, H&M Capital actually supports this design more than the design that actually the parks staff came up with. So he actually is really supportive of moving forward with this type of design. The thing that I meant about standards and making sure that things are done in the department standards is making sure irrigation and making sure the benches are the type of benches that are consistent throughout our park system. Just all the amenities, making sure ADA is taken into account. So all those items that as we build parks in our city, all the items that we have to take into account, we have to make sure that those are part of this design. So this is concept. This is really, really high level. So we have to take these concepts and actually put together the construction designs. And so that takes time. So a lot of people think we can just take a design like this and just go start building. It takes quite a bit of time to actually put together construction documents and get them through the city system, because you do 30% construction design, 60%, 90%, and then 100%. So just moving through that process takes a time, and then all the departments have to actually buy off on what those standards and those designs are.
Got it. And I think it's specificity and really being, I think this is not the time to do shorthand. And so I think that that's a pretty different answer, and it's a more specific answer, and it's important. One of the things that's occurred in this process is setting of expectations and then not meeting them or not being clear. And so to say the spirit of this is on the table, but that there's numerous features that don't meet the city standards for potentially legitimate reasons, right? Which is not that the community's ideas weren't good, but and so I just want to make sure I'm saying this right. So you might not be able to have a wall here, for example, because it might prevent access for people with disabilities, or it might prevent drainage from working properly. But so there are features here that are not possible, and I just think we got to be really clear. And I just so if things are not possible, we got to be clear.
And that would be something that would take place during the design process, where we actually really start hammering out what's going to be in this park. Like when I look at this, I see the shade structure, and it's one of the cloth shade structures. As we have done parks throughout our system, we have done these, and we're realizing that these are really, really delicate, and they're being ripped off, and they're being destroyed. So those are the types of things that I would really want to make sure that we're doing. We're putting in a shade structure that actually we don't have to try to change out every year because of weather. You know, there was the talk of building a wall around the park and kind of walling it in. Well, we want to really make sure that the park actually has access, and that you can get in and out of it, and you don't want to build walls around the park. We want to make it as open as possible. So just some of those items, we want to just really make sure that we're working with the community hand in hand to make sure that everybody's input is being taken, but they also understand that there's constraints and things that we have to do to make sure that the park is up to our standards.
Got it. So I just wanted to clarify that record. Thank you.
Thank you for
that. Can you
that.
clarify whether there is anything, you know, they're equally sized parcels, but is there anything in particular that changes the design from the west side to the east side? Are there any constraints that would make it such that the park would have to be or would need to be designed differently if it was on one side or the other?
I truly don't believe there would be any different design. They're exactly the same size, and as Councilman Flynn mentioned, both of them are going to have developments on either side. What we were excited about, to be honest with this parcel, is that there will be eyes on the park, and this is going to be immediately. We're going to have restaurants there, and people will be able to watch this space. People will be able to come to eat, and their kids can play on the playground. And I've heard some other comments that we didn't have swings in our design or slides, and we can. That's simple too. We can add those to the design. So we want to make sure that those items are in this design, the things that the community want. And if that's swings and slides and a barbecue pit, those types of things, we can do that.
So I just want to say it back to you so I'm really clear that everything, there's the idea of all these things can be considered, but you won't fit all of them because of the size.
Yes.
And that the way they're done may not be the exact way the community's designed them, but for reasons you can and will explain in the process.
Yes, we will.
Okay. I guess the second line of questions I wanted to ask, I guess I'm trying to think if I want to start with the developer or the community. I'm going to offer this to like Lamone or to Sandy, but I guess I was thinking about whether or not there has been any discussion at all with the developer, not so much about this park, but about the ways in which businesses can be culturally competent and the way that you might train, educate, interact in ways that minimize. So I'm just curious if that dialogue has occurred throughout this. You guys probably have had many meetings aside from the park, so I'm just curious if that conversation has begun yet.
So that's the other part is, you know, if this land swap is approved, The other part is looking into the type of businesses that will go into the complex. And Ben and I have been talking about that. And we do want to make that a community inclusive process. So anytime we can get that started. But Ben appears to be conscious. He did say he was not interested in chain stores and franchises. He was definitely interested in some of the historical businesses that were on the block who are no longer, and then culturally sensitive type businesses.
Great. And then just to be really clear, what if, did you talk at all about, we've had a number of companies who've had to train their staff and talk about, right? To Sandy's point, so beyond just who the businesses are, has there been any conversation yet about cultural competency for all of the businesses? Perhaps they may be white-owned, perhaps they may be Asian-owned, they may be owned by someone who's maybe not an African-American business, or the employees might be, of different backgrounds. And so have you guys started that conversation
We
yet?
will, and that's going to be part of the conversation.
Okay, great. And so I'll just ask Ben to stand up and maybe speak for yourself on this. I think that there is this concept of by right zoning where this project started. And it's a kind of like, we can build it and we don't need anything from the city. And then the park changed the conversation in the sense that there is now, you're here in front of city council and you wouldn't have been otherwise. And so, sometimes that comes with an acknowledgement that where you want something from the city and you've acknowledged some places it could benefit, it changes the conversation. So I guess for you, where have you changed, or where are you willing to change where you go on what's quote unquote on the table with regard to the development, given that this is no longer just a by right situation? You're here asking for a very important privilege, which is to incorporate public space in the middle of your development.
Right. I think this process has definitely been eye-opening. I've never gone through anything similar to this, so it's been a very eye-opening process, and we are open to anything that the community comes at us with. We've always thought of this as we wanted to do it as part of the community, and if we didn't want to do that, if we weren't here for the right reasons, I think we would have given up on this plan a year and a half ago and gone a different direction. And our commitment has always been to what we feel was the, developers always talk about highest and best use, and I can't stand that term because a lot of times the highest and best just they're contradictory, right? And to me, the best use for this block is a mixed-use development with retail, office, and residential. And we've been fighting the whole time to preserve what we think will benefit everybody equally throughout that, and not just build what makes the most financial sense. So we're here, we've committed to this process, we've committed to everything about it, and we look forward to all the community engagement that we can get, and really putting our best foot forward and being as transparent as possible.
So let me ask you about another issue of equity that was raised. You and I had some conversations early on, and you were hopeful that you could incorporate some affordable housing. I was surprised to learn that the conversation had changed. That was not something I was told about by our department, which is a common challenge I have had from this dais recently, no fault of yours. But I want to just be, and I know they're not here, so I'm not even going to ask because I know they left. They were here for another bill. They weren't here for this. But can you just be very clear with me? Were you told that you cannot count units as affordable on this site, or did you make a decision that the way that you would have had to do it was not possible? I guess I want to understand whether or not the inclusion of affordability could be back on the table.
Yeah.
Whether it's a legal issue or it's an economic or a policy issue.
So technically, we've already paid the permit fees, and we're already through that process.
You've already paid the linkage fee?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
But to that process, all of our micro units actually fall under the studio affordability level that's required to get the points. But because of the square footage, there was some When we went through that process, it was brand new. The linkage fee had just passed. And so, in fairness to Office of Economic Development, they were unsure of how that was going to play out, I guess. I don't know the technical terms of it. So we had to make the decision of which way we're going to move forward. And, even though our units all technically follow, all the micro apartments technically follow under the affordability, it didn't make sense on the whole block because of all the three-bedroom units, the office space, the retail space. So that's why we moved in a different direction. We do a lot of affordable housing. We do group homes all over the city that are rented out to nonprofits. So we do our part on that, and we full-heartedly believe in that. We've got 2 that are run by Step Denver. We've got a couple that are run by Catholic Charities. We purchased the building that Catholic Charities used to have their headquarters in so that they could take advantage of a $1 million grant and build the 100-woman homeless shelter over off of Smith Road. We closed in 2 weeks so that they could meet a deadline for City Council to get a $1 million grant from you guys to do that project. So we're fully on board with affordability. It just didn't, the technical affordability on this one just didn't work out.
So I just want to be really clear. If you, according to the AMI levels, it wouldn't have brought down the rents in those units?
Correct.
Okay, so it wouldn't have gotten to the goal that the community was asking for, it sounds like. It wouldn't have changed the rents down to like $800 or anything like that? Or...
Correct. Technically, it would have raised the rents to be at the affordability level.
Okay, all right. I think that's it, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kniech. Councilwoman Lopez, I'm going to skip over you to go to Councilwoman Ortega before coming back, if that's all right. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start with Scott. Scott, is there any reason that a playground could not be there? I heard there was a desire to have a playground there. There was some question about whether or not that would be supported, but if it's adjacent to residential, is that going to be seen as a challenge, a problem? So
no, I mean, I would gather that this pocket park is going to have a playground, and I had mentioned that what an amazing space this could be if you could go as a family. You could go and have dinner, and actually your kids are playing on the playground right there, and you can watch them. It's just what is going to make up that playground. Is it going to be nature play, or is it going to be traditional play? And those are the things that we have to determine what's going to go in this park. But I would gather that this space will have a playground for sure.
So I heard your commitment to Councilman Brooks about putting together a committee to help look at design for the park. Who makes the final decision?
The final decision on that committee, or the final
what it is that ends up in that park?
So what we would do is actually put together a committee. We'd get 1 or 2 community members on that, and what they would actually help us do is actually help us go through the process of selecting a design firm to actually design this park, and that would actually get us to the construction documents that would then go out to bid for construction.
Okay. Let me see if I have any more for you before I go to Mr. Maxwell. So on the price, Councilman Lopez asked how much is it normally to do one of these pocket parks. Your answer was between $750,000 and $1 million. So we have $650,000. Who fills the gap?
As the Parks Department, we have committed to fill in that gap. It depends on what's going to go in that park. We could do the park cheap, probably, and build a park for $500,000, or we can build a park that truly this community deserves, and then it might go to $800,000. So we as a department.
Is there a cap on what Parks and Recs is
you can't really. I mean, I would hope that we don't go over $1 million, but you just don't know what the final cost is going to be until you get those design documents and it goes out to bid, and then a company gives us the cost of what it's going to be to build that park.
And typically, what percentage of that is the design?
Design usually runs about 10%.
Okay. All right. I have no further questions for you. So, Mr. Maxwell, if you can come up. So what is the total square footage of the development that you're looking at doing?
Making me do math in my head. So there's about, in the two mixed-use buildings, there's about 30,000 square feet.
So that's both housing as well as
That's
any
the
of the
retail,
commercial?
restaurant, micro apartments, and office.
Okay.
The townhomes is probably another 30,000 or so.
So a total of about 60,000?
Yeah, roughly,
Okay.
round numbers.
And I just want to ask a question about parking.
Mm-hmm.
I heard you say there would be parking off the alley, right?
Yes. Yes.
Will that include parking the commercial?
Yes, so currently we have parking on the first, behind the retail, along the alley, as well as parking lots that enter off of the alley. And then our plan is for the immediate future, for the next 2-3 years, to turn we own the parcel across the street, to have that as excess parking as well. So we're well in excess of the required zoning
So is
parking.
that where you tore down the building and it could be used for parking?
That building we
right
did
now?
not tear down. It was an operating business.
Okay, so you've got parking available there that could be
Yes.
shared?
Yes.
Okay.
And then we would also turn the existing parkland, or what the Excel station, into parking in the short term as well.
Okay. And I was pleased to hear your openness to the types of businesses and working with the community around trying to have businesses that address some of the cultural sensitivity
Absolutely.
to the neighborhood and the long-term history of the neighborhood. I don't believe I have any other questions at this point in time, so thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. Councilman Lopez, you disappeared when I skipped you. Are you still in line?
I'm still right here.
All right, go for it.
I don't know why it disappeared. It's messed up. I have a question for the developer. When you were looking at the park and planning on the block that you have, so you have the entire block from corner to corner.
Correct.
Why in the middle of the development? I mean, and I'm thinking to myself, if it's an issue of, and I'm not questioning your commitment to parks or anything like that. I do appreciate you coming to the table, but usually if we wanted to have eyes on the park, and I'm thinking of the substations that we've had in Barnum, the Barnum substation, which is in Westwood, and then there's another substation on Colfax. Dan Shaw, I should say, Colfax, and your ears should perk up. They're both on corners. Ideally, a good pocket park, if we have a choice, could be on a corner. And you would have community, and then you would have, folks in your development kind of sharing that corner. And also because it's open on almost on two visible sides. That's eyes on a park, that's street lights. Have you thought about doing it on a corner? That way it's a little bit more visible, and I think, we'd be able to get away with a lot more on a corner.
We did look at it. We kind of looked at what we thought was the, call it ideal location for it. And really it came down to what was economically feasible to make it so we could do the park and have successful development that actually could thrive. Because I think the worst thing that could happen for this community is we build a project that doesn't work, that's got too high a rents, that's got too much vacant space, that's not full with residential, not full with commercial, and we wanted this to be one cohesive neighborhood, and it wasn't just a matter of the park, it's how does it all work together as one solid block? Like, how do we
Really
create
think
one
you
block?
wouldn't be able to fill a rental unit in this city?
There's a lot, maybe not in this exact market, but this exact market's not going to last forever. And we're looking at this as a 20, 30, 40-year investment. We're not looking at this to turn it and sell it to a REIT. We're not looking at, selling this off to a California buyer in the next 2 years after we get it done. We're looking at owning this and being a part of this community for the next 20 or 30 years. And we can't look at what the market is right now. We have to look at what the market can be and will be again in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Lopez. Councilman Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is Tracey McDermott here? Oh, I didn't see you behind Kara. Could you come up? When Mr. Maxwell came to Greater Park Hill Community, you're saying that he made some statements that are different than what he's saying tonight.
That is correct. He stated that he got to design the park, he would name the park, he got to decide what events went in the park.
And he decided what?
What events went in the park.
What events, okay. And how long ago was that?
That would have been November 2017, I believe.
November, so less than a year ago.
Possibly. My timing may be incorrect on that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Maxwell, can you tell me why you would say something like that?
Absolutely. And that was November of 2016, I believe.
Okay.
Our initial thought in our initial conversations was Parks has no money to do a design for the park. Parks didn't have money for the construction. And if I said it in a manner that it came across, I truly regret that because that's not in all how we meant it. We just said we'll design the park. We will look at some of the options to build it. We did a design on it just to kind of move the process forward, but most importantly, it was just to move this process forward and get a park built. As far as, and when we also offered that we would contribute a significant dollar amount every year to maintain the park, but it would always be the Parks Department's park. At the time, at the January 2017 meeting with Greater Park Hill, we definitely stated that we would permit the park if we wanted to do events like movie night in the park, things of that nature.
I'm sorry, let me stop you. You would get a permit
we
from
would
the
get
city.
a permit from the city.
Not you would issue a permit.
Correct.
Okay.
We would get a permit from the city. One of the first things we did on our website in 2017, January 2017, was put a direct link to the Parks Department permitting process on our website.
I see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's
So
no
we
park
never,
there yet.
our intention was that we really didn't want to run the park, but we would do it until the community.
Let me ask you
stepped up
today,
and wanted
in
to-
August of 2018, what is HM Capital's position on your role in designing?
We want zero role in designing it. We want zero role in, we want to pay for it. We want to see the neighborhood get what they want, and we've always wanted that. We don't want to be a part of the design committee. Not that we don't want to, but we don't believe it's our place. We don't want a final say on the design. We made sure in the documents that we don't get any, overreaching design. We don't get any design oversight.
You don't intend to participate?
I don't pretend to participate in that. If we are not welcome at the table, if we're welcome at the table, we would happily have somebody from our team join the conversation. But in our opinion, this is a park that needs to be designed by the residents of the neighborhood, not by us.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
That's all, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilman Flynn. Councilwoman Kniech.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think one of the things we're all struggling with is the idea of how you rebuild some of the trust, particularly where this is the council vote. And so I just have a couple more questions to try to lay down, I think, a little more clarity of what happens. Yes. So if this swap were to pass,
yes.
We've heard from Councilman Brooks that over the course of the next week, he's going to get a greater level of detail about what the Park Design Advisory Committee, I might not be saying the right name, but that group will look like, so that before we vote on second, we see what Park Advisory Design process, a little more about what it looks like on paper. So I guess I'd like to get to that same point in terms of the discussion, and let's start with the east side first. Would you be willing to put on paper, and I think it would be good for you to talk to some of the neighbors who've talked about the other aspects of the development, to say, and maybe it's as simple, we've had this conversation before, that you would commit to 3 meetings or 3 discussions about, the rest of the development. So things that are not in the park's wheelhouse, but are in your wheelhouse regarding equity particularly. I think it's important. We have a divide that is somewhat, you cannot defy it, even though tonight it played out with some race on some side. I know many of us made calls to folks intentionally to get feedback, and I know I heard supporters who are African American, and I think it's going to be important to get to some folks who aren't here tonight as well. So if you could think about, and for the residents, I would encourage you to reach out. But would you be willing to commit to a minimum number of discussions about that topic?
Absolutely.
And then maybe give us a little detail next week, or in an email or something to give us some sense of that detail?
Yeah, I think we can do that. I personally have gone to pretty much every single Greater Park Hill meeting over the past 2 years or so almost now. I've publicly said at every one of those meetings, please reach out to me. Here's my email, here's my phone number, and a lot of people have, and I've had a lot of private one-on-one lunches and conversations with people on both sides of the fence. We're always willing to do that, and if we need to make it a formality, we're happy to.
Yeah, my request might be that it be on neutral ground, because I think there's some folks who, feel like it needs, so it's maybe your meeting, and if the community wants a facilitator, you ask, and we can help find someone that you choose, or you know what I mean? So I think find out what folks need, and if it's 3 meetings, and it's, something neutral, and it's separate from this parks thing. And then the other thing I want to ask about is the west side. Let's go back to the west side. I think this hasn't been a major topic tonight, but it certainly, I think, is an undercurrent, which is the fact that you do own a parcel on the west side at the end of this transaction, and the question about what by right zoning looks like going forward on that side of the block. So I guess I would ask, what is your willingness or commitment to engage in some process on the west side if and when that development time comes, even though you don't have to, even though there won't be a parks department, and even though there may not, maybe, who knows, as far as I know, there's unlikely to be a council vote, and I think that's where the trust gap has grown, is about what happens on the west side. So what commitments similarly can you make to some discussion process and transparency about that side, so we don't end up with these same set of feelings but no council hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can outline something that would maybe work for the whole community. We're kind of going into that west side with no preconceived notions of what it's going to be over the next 2 to 3 years. We've kind of just committed to it's going to be a parking lot for 2 to 3 years. Our goal is that that block can sustain more and more local retail and small use businesses, but we don't know that, and we got to see kind of how it plays out on the west side. So with that, I think we can commit to greater communication and transparency with the neighborhood organization, and maybe get some feedback and ideas from the neighborhood on what different folks would like to see on that side of the street.
I think where you don't have enough information to do a outcome-oriented good neighbor agreement, sometimes a process-oriented good neighbor agreement that says here's how we're going to meet and what we're going to talk about is at least a start. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Lopez, are you up again?
Yeah, just one more. This may be for Councilman Herndon. Councilman, you've been the councilman here for 8 years. How high is this in terms of priority? If this particular site, so this particular site where the park was proposed, that used to be the Excel substation, that would be 2863 Fairfax. It's going to take, let's just call it inflation, let's round it up, $790,000 to build this park. What's been the conversation that you've had with Parks and Rec? Are they going to commit to it? Is this something that's been on your priority as a capital improvement? I know that they meet with us, Parks and Recs meet with us, usually to get guidance from us about those projects. Is this a priority for you? And if so, how? When does that look like? What does that look like?
So to make sure I hear you correctly, this parcel absolutely is a priority, getting a park built in North Park Hill. No disrespect to the park at the corner of Martin Luther King in Quebec. I don't consider that an active park. North Park Hill is a park desert. So bringing something to this is a huge priority, but as was discussed, every council person on this dais can talk about CIP, that's capital improvement projects, throughout the district that are frankly higher than this third of an acre. But so finding a way to build a park for the community, a community design park, is of huge priority for North Park Hill.
So is this project on your CIP for this year?
Well, it will depend on how this vote goes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Lopez. Councilman Espinosa.
And just more of a note for clarification. The EMS2 zone district only allows 3 building forms: the drive-through services, the drive-through restaurant, and the shop front form. So the shop front form is going to be sort of the maximum density version of development, and it's one of our most sort of more restrictive base zoning as far as what that form looks like and how it addresses the street. So it's sort of safe to say that unless it's a drive-through form, formally they're going to essentially relate to each other. Whatever the use is on either side, physically they're going to manifest themselves the same way. All right, thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Espinosa. Seeing no other questions,